sessions, speaking to you live and very much alive once again. My name is Stepan Prokorenko, and today I have the honor of speaking to Alberto Mastretta, the artist and co-founder at Original Fire Games, developers of Circuit Superstars. Hello, Alberto.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
So yeah, as Stepan said, my name is Alberto. I'm one of the founders of Original Fire Games. We're a 5-person team with the ambitious goal to create beautiful racing games. And our first game is Circuit Superstars, which I'm about to show you how we use Houdini to speed up our workflow and vastly enhance what we could do as a small team.
Right. So I would like to remind everyone that we're taking questions for Alberto during this presentation. So Alberto will now present his screen and share some tips on using Houdini as part of a small team or something like that. If you have a question that you would like him to cover at the end of this session, please share it in the chat and we'll pick it up and cover as many questions as possible during this Q&A section. Right now, I will disappear and Alberto will share his wisdom.
Okay, so today I'd like to take you a bit on a tour of how we use Houdini to create tracks like this. So there's quite a few assets that I'm gonna have to run through, and I'm gonna have to do it quick on each one, so I won't dive into the details of each one, but I will try to make an explanation of how they were built and why they were so useful for us. So this is a finished scene, and I prepared a scene here that is not complete. It's an in-progress track. So we'll be able to see sort of from beginning to end what it could look like to work with Houdini once you have a pipeline that you've set up. So before I start, I do want to elaborate a little bit on the problem that we had and how Houdini was helpful for us. So we're working in Unity. We had a small team that at any given moment, we were 1 or 2 artists working on the tracks. So we had to make sure that we could iterate quickly on the design of the tracks, but we also didn't have a lot of time to do multiple passes of design and art and have a pipeline that was multi-step. So we try to condense everything into design and final art are one thing. And because we're targeting Nintendo Switch, it also needed to be extremely performant, and it needed to be able to be baked. So all of the assets that I'm about to show you have light maps that we don't touch manually. It's all automated with the process of each HDA, which is the Houdini digital asset that we use. So we first start with a terrain, and then, as one would expect, we go ahead and start with a track. This is one of the tools we used. It's very simple. It just matches the ground underneath and creates, where did I go? Creates the sidelines that you can see here. It's quite tweakable. You can control a bunch of the parameters that it has. You can adjust the width and also change the amount of columns that it has, the resolution, and this is all UV map, which is the best part of it. So once we have that, we end up with a layout that we can use to start placing and testing how the track is feeling and try and come up with the best layout possible that we can. Now, another thing that is really useful for us has been the curve tool. So we have a bunch of curves here. Placing this automatically is not something we wanted because there's very particular scenarios in which you want curves or not, depending on the track designer's idea of how they want to drive this track. So because curves allow for different paths to be taken and they also can restrict them depending on the shape, it's very important that we can iterate on them and make them quickly. So the way we went about it was that we made a tool that would automatically generate this surface for us. And the very useful part of this is that this is not just about placing it in the world, but also controlling the way it is designed. So if we wanted a bigger one, we could always make it, or we can control the width, we can control the height, we control the how steep it is, and this all changes the gameplay quite drastically. And then because laying down curves manually would be very inconvenient, what we did is that we magnetize it to the track. So the way we do so is we give it a mesh to reference, and then the tool will find the border edges of that mesh and it'll snap to it. So here's how that looks. And now I can just place it in the ballpark of where I want it. I don't need to be very accurate, and it'll still contour the track very well. So this was one of the most useful tools we had in our arsenal to come up with gameplay and really be able to fine-tune how the track was behaving under the cars. Another goal that we had for our style is that we wanted the game to have a very distinct and readable look from top down. So we didn't do any splat maps for terrain. We decided to do everything with meshes so that it could be extremely readable. And it also has a different aesthetic that we think is unique and we enjoy having it in our game. So the way we did that was with these ground patches, which we can control how bumpy they get, and they also get a gradient from the sides. This is all placed in vertex data. So this allowed us to control the color palette quite flexibly and be able to lay down very fast all the different parts that we wanted grass in, or even things like sand as well. So in this case, around a corner, there would be a scenario where the players would want. I think I flipped it, but yeah. Let's do this. There we go. So this is how we would very quickly come up with different colors on the track that would represent different surfaces and start to really dress up the track and create this motorsporty feel of sand traps, for example. And this was very quick for us. It's not perfectly like automated. It doesn't happen on its own, but it gives us all the control we need. And we love it for being like that. Another thing that is key to racetracks is having a very easy way to do all these walls, all these fences and barriers, because all these motorsport tracks have them. And it's also a very key part of the risk on a track, how close you get to the walls. So having very manual control of how we went about this is what we wanted. And this tool that we made has a few tricks that we're really proud of. So I'm gonna show you how that looks like. So first, the tool is very agnostic to what you're doing. So it's not, in this case, we have arm cuts here, but you could have just a couple of spheres and a cylinder, and then decide that you want to extrude that, and you would get this. So this will take any mesh you want and then just extrude it in that shape, which is quite magical for us. It will just update very quickly, and it allows us to also iterate on how the barriers look from afar. It's better to look at gameplay because our game, it's very easy to get too close to the details, but then we have to play it and we realize, oh, they're not readable from that distance. So having this flexibility to very quickly update how things look was fantastic. And this is really some of the most powerful techniques we use this, having those interconnected systems that one generates barriers, the other one can generate the profile of the barrier. And then with those two combined, you can very quickly dress up a level just how you want it. So I thought I would show you how that tool eventually is used by placing a little barrier here. And I'm gonna have to recook it, but once it's done. Oh, it may have lost the reference. Oh, bubble. Here you go. Sometimes those things do happen, but they're very easy to just fix and keep working. Right now, I'm gonna skip the. Well, you know what? It's close enough. I'm gonna do the post as well, just so that it looks complete. And there we go. Got the full arm barrier. This is all UV mapped. It has light maps. You can bake it. It also has a collision mesh that is simplified. It's got a bunch of things already set up. And yeah, we use it extensively. We also have different types of object barriers. So these are not sweep. They're not extruding anything. They're just instancing. So a different premise, but also used throughout the game in many different circumstances. So the way we do that is it's similar. We can also have an object that we can give it. So in this case, we can do a tire barrier stack. We can change the stack. Let's see. So we can do that, and then once we're happy, we can send it to the barrier to start generating this very quickly. Where am I? Oh, I'm updating the sweep one. So we have one here. I'm gonna lay down. So in this one, I'm gonna show you exactly how it works. So we can go to the pile generator and change the amount of wheels that it has, and it'll automatically update on the tool. And on the tool itself, where is it? On the tool itself, we can also change the colors. So we can say we want the 4 different colors. We can do it like so, and then change the pattern. I'm going to go with 4. Because this is an object-based one, we can also choose to stack them at different distances. And that's how we space them out just the way we want them, color them, and end up with a tire barrier that also is all UV mapped. And it has a collision mesh that you can see is doing all of that for us. And we only had to create two tools for this, just one model creator, let's say. You could also model this out in Maya if you wanted. We chose to make it an HDA as well, so that we could iterate on the thickness and the final look on the track. It's easier to see it here in Unity, and adjust it rather than making the model in Maya or any other 3D software and go back and forth. It's really flexible if you can do it here on the fly. And so once they are created, build this. Once they're created, it's easy. Just we want them. So we're making a little corner here, corner of a racetrack, by using all these assets. So you can see it's not taking too long to start dressing all this corner of the game with the color palette that we want, and it's very easy to change the color palette. As you saw, if we choose that this track is going to be blue instead, we can very quickly update all of this. Not an issue. We also have other types of barriers. This is like alternating objects. So this one, similar to this barrier one, but more of a pattern. So in this case, we have a tube and then a plank, and we'll alternating between the posts and the horizontal planks. And we also are giving it distinct ones. So if you see, they're not all the same. They're changing in shape. So for this tool, we have quite a bit of flexibility. We can give it different planks, and also we can give it different posts. In this case, I just gave it one type of post and different types of planks. And yeah, it allows us to also very quickly start to set dress tracks. Actually, sometimes the colliders get rendered for some reason, but it's very easy to fix with a rebake. So these are all the basic core track tools that we use. Are different types of barriers, curbs, grass, and paths. Beyond that, we have also another key one is fences. So catch fences are important in motorsport. They protect the crowd, they protect the racers as well from going into gnarly places. So having a quick way to generate these things was important for us. And if you think about it, it's very similar to this one. You need to extrude a mesh and then instantiate some posts. But in this case, we did it as a separate HDA. It has its own unique properties. So I'm going to show you how that looks like and why we did it as its own HDA. It's not exactly just extruding. It's also making sure that this can be controlled. The UV on this one can be controlled manually, so that we can change the scale of the pattern, as well as changing the properties on the length. So if we want the top to be longer, we can do so. So we can control the shape very easily. We can control the angle. So in case it's obstruting the visuals, we can bend it down a little. We can also change the way the tubes are made. We can pack and instance them. This changes the way they're rendered from being like a full mesh that is all merged together to instances. We can also add these little knobs at the end that make it look a little bit more finished. We quite like that. And just as easily as the previous HDH that I showed you, it's extremely easy to use once you set all this up. That's a bit of a weird solution I left, but we're going to leave it like that so that I can keep covering more assets. So because we have such a segmented art style, everything is like in a piece of its own. So are our cliffs. So we made this cliff tool. The cliff tool is one that we really like to sort of block out the outside of the tracks. it really helps us sort of give a finishing touch to the tracks when we're running out of road, let's say, and we don't want to decorate too far. We can block it out by using these cliffs. And the cliffs have quite a few things to tinker with. So we have, what do we have? Oh, the cliff noise. So we can control the noise. So we can make it look more rocky if we want. Depending on the track, we may change the type of noise we're using. So you can also choose different types of noise. Vertex color. So we're not texturing any of this. This is mostly just using world space texturing and vertex colors. And that's how we so quickly can change the color palette, change the look of things. And we're not going into Photoshop. We're not even going into Substance for any of these things. We're not bringing them into external software. We're directly getting a final mesh that we like here in Unity, and we can hit play at any moment, and it'll work just fine. So if we wanted to use that cliff, we can just play with it. And usually it takes like a couple of refreshes to bake once when you reopen a scene. But once you open a scene and play with it, all these HDAs work flawlessly. It's just the first time that you open them. You may need like a couple of refreshes. Okay, so that's sort of the core of things that are very directly on the ground. And now I'd like to show you some of the props we use. So one thing that is very present on racetracks are grandstands. So these ones we didn't do we didn't do procedurally. These are generated. You could make them procedural and bend them if you want, but in our case, we felt this is the type of mesh that we could author manually, but we have a few tricks that we use around them that we quite like. So we've got these decorators called, there are hanging flags. So all this is generated by Houdini. The wing properties are being baked into the UVs of the mesh, and it is gradually giving different properties to different parts of the mesh. So for example, the waving motion of the wind is mapped at 0% here and 1 here. So we can gradually calculate the fall of where we want the wind to affect this mesh. And this tool is quite fun to use. It was also one of the most fun to make. And once we have it, we can do quite a few things. So this is a different use of that tool. This is called papel picado here in Mexico. You may have seen it in like Dia de Muertos celebrations. And the way you can do all of this is by just adding points. So if I add a point, a different step, and like so, you can very quickly start to decorate with this if we want to. We love using this tool. The fact that it automatically takes care of the wind for us and it looks so natural is impressive. And we only really needed to calculate the distance between this point and then make a gradient and store that in the UV data, and then use that UV data in the shader to move this. And the reason why we used it in the UV data and not the vertex colors, because often wind is mapped to vertex colors, like in trees, for example, was because we wanted the vertex colors to control the pattern. So we can change the colors of this if we want. Oh, I didn't click on this. Change the colors. Let's make it green. There we go. So that's a really fun tool. Then we've got another wind affected mesh that we made. So this one is not an HDA in Unity. We entirely modeled this in Houdini, which was very convenient to model it there because it could give us these gradients by proximity. We could paint the mesh by using procedural nodes to measure the proximity to different parts of the mesh. So we put some spheres here to sort of lock down the wind on these portions, and then when it waves, it's getting pinned there. It's not gonna move, but the rest of it it's being affected by wind. And we did that just by using a node that can measure the proximity and transfer that proximity into a property. That property was color, so we painted black anything that was near 3 points here or this entire tube. So we've got flags and we got hanging flags. We can combine them and start to decorate. Like so. It's really fun. I love using the flags in Circuit Superstars. We also had to come up with different sponsors. So sponsors, they're different shapes in different parts of the track. We may want them smaller, taller. So we were able to do all of that by making an HDA and very quickly changing all the properties. So this is a procedural model, which means that if we ever want a different type of sponsor, we can just generate it here, come up with a shape. If we want it square, we just need to change here, like until it's square. And then now we have a completely different mesh. This is, again, all this is UV mapped. All this has vertex colors as well. So you can texture it in Substance if you want. We can also use vertex colors directly, as we very often do. And most importantly, it's light mapped. So if we want to bake the track, this is light mapped already. So we don't ever look at UVs when we're making sponsor signs. Another one we did, which I don't have an example for this track because this is sort of like a building HDA, but if you had a building and you wanted to fill it with leaves, really pretty, we have an ivy leaf generator. So this one I love using. You just specify what you want it to surround and then recook it, and it'll populate whatever you're indicating it to populate. So the way we did that was we would have a building, and then we would manually outline a mesh with Pro Builder. We would use Unity's Pro Builder to sort of indicate where we want the leaves to go, and then we would pass that mesh to these, and then suddenly you have very beautiful foliage around the building. I love using that one. Another great way to use Houdini for us was nature. So let's show some of the nature we have. When it comes to making trees, the biggest thing for us was, how do we make a distinct silhouette? We were really focusing on just trying to come up with a silhouette that when you looked at it from the side, it represented the tree that you had in mind. So it could be tall, it could be wide, and we didn't really want to have to meddle with too many properties. We just wanted to get the shape the way we want it, and very quickly get a tree out of it. So if I recook this, you see that it'll adapt to that silhouette that I was generating. So if I want this tree to be tall, now I have a tall tree. And because it's a top-down game, we didn't really need the leaves to be pointing in lots of different directions. We just needed them to be pointing up. So you'll see that you can't see them from below, and this isn't a very effective tree to be rendered in a game where you have the camera lower to the ground. But in our case, this was very effective. Again, all UV mapped, all these different triangles, mostly they're just quads, are being laid down, and you can actually inspect the mesh if you really want to, and see the UV layout for channel 1. There we go. That's the UV map. This is the UV map for channel 0, which is the one getting the texture. This is all pretty automatic for us. Another thing that was important for this was that we do want the leaves to point sort of inwards, so that if you look at them from different angles, it still is looking like it's rounding out. And so there's a ton of things here happening with the normals and so on, but the one I wanted to show you was the part that controls how the leaves are oriented. Let's see. Centroid. So if I put the centroid at 0, all the leaves point to the center of the mesh. So as I start to make it downwards, the leaves are going to start to orient themselves to face that direction. So they're going to start to face up more because they're actually looking down. Oh, what's it, -5? I think I lost the minus there. So you can see very quickly we can orient the leaves just the way we want. And if we want the tree to have, if you see here, we're getting very shallow angle for those. So we may want to go higher and they'll look more flat. And now, once we had that, we would just pair it up with a trunk that we would model. You can model these in Houdini. There's lots of ways to make trees in Houdini. This is just the way we did it. And you would combine it with this, and then you have a tree. And then once we had that, we would mostly just turn that into a prefab. And then we would use our next nature tool, which was our scatter tool. So we didn't want to manually place all these things around the track. So what we did is we just made a scattering tool where we define an area where we want vegetation to be. And we can put all types of vegetation here. Right now, I just gave it 4 different trees, which actually, in this case, it could have been 1. They all look very similar. But if you put a pine tree, it'll look very different, right? And then with the scatter tool, we can control the coverage. So it gives us a lot of control on how we want this section of the track to be populated by these trees. It's also easy to test. If your performance is tanking, maybe you just go in and adjust the slider. but our trees are actually very performant, and in Unity's URP, it's not an issue. Okay, so the last one that I wanted to show you was our tree creator, which is a different type of tree creator. This one is, instead of making leaves, this one makes a full tree, but it really only works for trees that don't have like a canopy, but more, well, I don't know if canopy is the right word, but they don't have like a volume, but rather they have an extrusion. So for all of these, we just tweaked a few settings, and we have a line here that we can use to change the height. And this is how we made lots of different trees. And we could control lots of settings here to make them thicker on the top, like this one that shrinks to the bottom. So the reason why I like using Houdini instead of a tool like SpeedTree is because with this one, we had very, very direct control of performance and our shaders. So if we wanted to have a specific feature, we could do so. And Houdini gives us all the control we need to make the tools work exactly the way we want them. Okay, so that concludes the tour of the HDAs that we built. So what I wanted to do sort of as a conclusion was, now that I've shown you how we used it, I would like to sort of put a bit of background into how long all this took and how feasible it is if you're a small indie dev, that you could take advantage of these tools. As I said in the beginning, we only have about 2 artists tops working on tracks at any given time. So we had really limited resources to spend time on by looking into different solutions. And we had about a 2-month window to come up with a pipeline because we were running out of time. So all of the tools that you see here were made in under 2 months, starting from scratch. So I had previously zero knowledge of Houdini, and I came across a fantastic tutorial by Kenny Lammers, or also known as IndiePixel, for making racetracks. And it covered about 80% of the knowledge that I needed to get all these tools in place. The rest of the knowledge I found around the Houdini learning site. And I spent about 1 month learning Houdini. So I had no experience, and then just watched tutorials for a full month of development. I did not contribute to the project during that month. I was just learning. But once I did so, I spent another month making this pipeline that vastly changed the premise of our game. And it allows us to meet the ambitious goal that we had of creating all of these tracks in the aesthetic that we wanted and in the performance that we wanted. So this runs at 60 frames on Nintendo Switch. And as I said, yeah, it was only 2 months, one of learning and one of implementing all the tools. And plus some days that I would spend here and there fixing the tools, because while we were using them, we would find issues with them. Oh, this one is not doing the UV maps correctly. I would go back and fix them. But really, it was under 3 months for the duration of the project spent in Houdini, and mostly, I would say, 2 months plus a few days here and there for maintenance. So if you're a small studio and feel like you could enhance your pipeline, I would strongly recommend that you slow down and learn anything you need in order to get to do so, because the advantages of making better tools are immeasurable. So the way we went about that was Houdini. I think Houdini is it's extremely convenient for making this type of things. You could, of course, make your own in Unity and C#. It would probably run a lot more snappy, but you would take so much longer to make them because they have such a robust toolset for making this type of things. So I would strongly encourage any indie teams that are making 3D worlds to give Houdini a look, see if it works for them. But yeah, I am very happy that we chose to use it, because otherwise I don't think we could have made this game. So that concludes the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Alberto. I will not pretend that I understand like more than 30% of what you've said, but it did sound very, very interesting.
Thank you.
So let me start from this. Judging from our chat, Circuit Superstars has a very passionate community. And one of the things that they're very passionate about is creating new tracks. So as I understand, Circuit Superstars does not have a track editor right now.
No.
And what I want to ask you is, like, can people use tools like Houdini and Unity to build racetracks themselves for the game, as asked by MPH26?
So it is a thing that would be possible. It would need a lot of infrastructure. We have an online game, so distributing those materials would be difficult to make it work. We don't have a modding interface, or we don't have modding capabilities in the game at the moment, but we do want to explore the possibility of making our tools available, so that one day we can extend all this tool set to our community and make a game where people can contribute to the racetracks that the game features. So that's our future goal. I don't think we will make it for Circuit Superstars 1, but it is possible that, and it's something we're exploring for future projects.
Right. And like theoretically, tools like Houdini specifically, do they help when it comes to stuff like track editors and giving community tools to build tracks for a game, or levels for a game?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I mean, if you're building the game with Houdini, will it impact in the future if you decide to give the community tools like track editor or level editor? Does it impact it at all?
So
make it easier or harder?
Houdini doesn't ship with a runtime version, so any Houdini code that is in Unity gets stripped out of the game when we build it. So there's no way currently to have an in-game editor, but what would be possible is to download Unity, download Houdini, and download the set of tools, and then come up with a way where we can package those things, export them, and for our games to recognize that as game levels. The other alternative is to not use Houdini at all and just make all these tools manually, but it takes an extreme amount of labor to do so. So that's why it's either using Houdini and Houdini and exporting that, or making an in-game tool that is made probably in C#. I don't know if Houdini has plans to include any of the Houdini operations in a runtime environment, but that would be terrific if they could do so.
Oh, I know that we have Ben from Houdini listening to us live, and maybe if he wants to answer that question in the chat, he's welcome to. But we have another question. So, Minardi Simsport is asking whether sponsors could be exchanged in real time, or it has to be done beforehand, because those assets needs to be baked first.
So it would be possible. What we would need to do is point the texture to a server, to an environment like PlayFab, which is what we use, and then pull a texture from there. So it would be possible. It's not something we did at the moment, but it would be possible to make, instead of making the material, just grab a texture that is in Unity, you make it, grab a texture from the internet and then load it dynamically. And there would be some, because of Circuit Superstars is baked lighting, there would be some mismatch, but it would be negligible, and I don't think it would deter from the visual fidelity enough to not do it. Yeah.
Okay, Okay, another question from let's do Stony this time. Have you had to decrease the amount of foliage for the Switch release?
No. So the foliage, what we did have to do was we previously had two different shaders, one which was double-sided. You would see leaves from one side and the other. And then we had a shader that was only single-sided. It was more effective to just use a single-sided shader and duplicate the geometry on the trees that were using double-sided. So we did change the geometry so that we could use a single shader all throughout the game. And that was more performant as well. So that was the only real change. We didn't have to reduce the amount of foliage in the game for Switch.
Okay, before we proceed to other questions about Houdini, let's do one more from the passionate community of circuit superstars. Shirode Bak is asking whether you guys are planning to release slightly longer straights for the next circuits.
Slightly longer straights? We do have a limit on the size of the world because the texture that we use to paint the tire marks on the ground gets blurrier and blurrier the more you grow it, and we can only go we can't change the resolution on that because it has performance impacts. So we try to keep the worlds under 200 meters square, which is very small. But I think we could push it just like 225. Otherwise, it starts to get blurry and we lose some visual fidelity. But yeah, it would be possible.
Perhaps in the future. Let's go back to Houdini. Is it possible to use Houdini as part of a procedural level generation, for example, for creating buildings or creating roads in real time?
Yeah, there's amazing resources online on how to do so. As I said, we spent 1 month learning Houdini, and that was just me. So I didn't get to learn all the magic that Houdini allows for. I didn't even get to show all the tools we did. We did more for rocks, for example. But buildings is one of the biggest ones because for the next project, I plan on spending more time learning Houdini again so that we can leverage those possibilities for making, for example, automated roads for a city and buildings, which I've seen the examples of what Houdini is putting out. And like the Matrix demo, for example, is incredible. And for us, if we could just paint some lines on the ground and get the roads to follow that path and then get buildings scattered between the blocks of those roads with a specific aesthetic, that's the goal for us for the next project. And we want to do so with those capabilities of procedural buildings and procedural roads. So it is entirely possible. And you could even automate all of this even further. So we had plenty of manual control, but there's ways in which you can interconnect HDAs and make them work sort of in an orchestra. So yeah, there's so many ways to take advantage of Houdini that we didn't get to. But I think what was very special about our case was how little time we had to implement all of this and how much mileage we got out of it. And that's what I hope other indie devs can take out of it, is even if you don't have all the time in the world to learn everything there is to learn, if you just make this one tool that will save you a month, it'll be worth it.
Okay, let's do another question from Trodebak. Do you think about applying night-day transition and weather effects for the next project, and how would that affect the circuits that you create? I would specifically share some thoughts about using Houdini in night-day circuit and weather effects, how it impacts it at all.
Yeah, so it would impact. We would have to change our shaders, for example, to support. For future project, what we would like to do is weather and day-night, and that would mean that we can't fully bake lighting, but what we could still leverage the capabilities of light mapping in Unity to do real-time global illumination and still get nice bounce light and ambient light out of it. So Houdini would still be helping us tremendously. by those capabilities. And it is entirely possible to do those things. It's just performance that gets affected. So there's plenty of work to be done in performance in that regard. And then some neat things like if you go nighttime, you either backlight, or if you have some dynamic lights, then you gotta use deferred rendering ideally, because it is better for performance when you have many lights. And so there would be differences in the project setup for supporting that type of feature, but it is very much possible.
Mm-hmm. We have a couple of questions, and you've touched that already, about learning Houdini and how much time it takes. So, as I understand, to achieve your current skill level, you've spent a month learning Houdini, and then you've applied it during development of Circuit Superstars and kind of learned on the job, right?
That's right.
And like, how much time, let's say, if you're a complete novice and this is your first game and you just like you've opened Unity, would you recommend starting to learn Houdini as well, or maybe you should spend some time working without it and just create the first game using the simplest tools possible?
So I would say it really depends on the person. I have a background where I'm both an artist and a programmer. I'm not like an elite engineer, but I know my way around code, and I'm very familiar with node-based interfaces as well for generating logic. So for a person like me, it was relatively simpler than a person who is either starting out, or maybe they're purely an artist, and they haven't gained experience using generating logic either by code or through node-based interfaces. So I think the time that is required for learning Unity will vary vastly depending on the technical background of the person. But yeah, it also depends on the project. So 2D games, for example, have fantastic tools natively. But 3D games have not nearly as many tools to design levels quickly. Like, we don't operate in tiles. There's no tile tools in Unity natively, like there is for 2D or splines, for example. So making 3D games is a lot harder due to the lack of tooling, I think. So supplementing that and fixing that problem, it's of course extremely valuable, but only if the game requires it. There's many types of design that don't really need procedural workflows. They would benefit most likely, but if you're working with tiles and prefabs and just building a world with that, which is entirely doable, I don't think it's required, but I do think there's a huge benefit in the visual quality that you can aim for if you have better tools.
Right. Speaking of prefabs, another question that we had, how can the system, I think that's Houdini, take advantage of the prefab system found in Unity or other engines with a similar setup?
So Unity can bring in an HDA, Houdini digital asset, and then you can sort of model in Unity, test it, and then you can export that model and treat it as a model that you brought from any other software. You can make it a prefab, just like the trees that I showed. Once you are happy with how a mesh looks, you can bake it and turn it into a prefab, and then work as you would as if you had made the file in Blender or Maya. But you have the flexibility that you can see it in game, play it, and verify that you actually like the proportions, the shape, the colors before you bake that. So I think the benefits on certain types of objects, of making them in Unity with HDAs, are huge. You could, of course, there's plenty of ways to work rapidly between Maya and Blender, and Unity. But still, I think the capabilities of having the procedural nature in Unity's lighting, for example, and being able to directly see the how it will look in game as you're modeling it is very unique.
Right. Well, I think that Houdini is a newer tool than, say, Unity or Unreal Engine, specifically in game development. So, from your experience, is there enough learning resources on the internet to get started? And maybe you have a few recommendations for people who want to learn how to use Houdini in games development.
Yeah, I think there is. Obviously, Unity has an immense amount of tutorials, but what I think Houdini has is that it doesn't have as many, but it has them very well organized in their website. So if you want to learn Houdini, of course, you can look in YouTube and you'll find a lot of resources there. But in the Houdini website, it's cataloged very well. So if you're looking for modeling or procedural modeling for games, they have a category for that. So you can start learning. And my teacher was in the Pixel. That's who I learned most of it, Houdini from. And yeah, about 80% of the knowledge I needed, I got it from his tutorials. And this very specific tutorial that he has for racetracks was fantastic. But there's other amazing tutorials for buildings, for example. Yeah, there's so much material to cover, and I haven't covered it all, but I do feel there's enough for a person who is putting in the time to feel comfortable with Houdini in a couple months. I don't think you will feel blocked by lack of knowledge available.
Mm-hmm. Let's do one more question from Trode Duck. So the objects are created in Circuit Superstars in a way where you can see the cars when they're behind. So why the game doesn't have bridges or pedestrian bridges in the current state?
Mostly just for visibility. Bridges like where a car can go over a different part of the track, like in a figure 8, like a track like Suzuka, for example. We don't have that solution yet because we use a map for painting. So you would paint on both the bridge and the under road because it's using a single texture. So we don't have. I mean, it would be a visual quality problem. It's not really a big problem, but it would be there. And yeah, we don't put bridges just because when we tried it, we felt it obstructed a little too much, so we just avoided them.
Yeah, Ben from Houdini is correcting me and says that Houdini has been around for the last 30 years, which is right, but in games development specifically, it is a newer tool. And I think that in the last few years, developers have started to use it much more actively than before.
Mm-hmm.
Well, before we finish, one of the most complicated questions I have encountered in a while from Oliver. GMC or Volkswagen?
GMC or Volkswagen? Oh no, I can't. I would have to be looking at a specific model. Yeah.
No comment from you. No comment. All right. Okay, so to every developer who has joined us today, I would like to remind you that if you are from the United Kingdom or Germany, we, as an IndieCap, will be having new seasons of the festival this year in the next few months, and Houdini is sponsoring both of them. So the winners of the festival will receive a 1-year Houdini license for free. So keep up to date with our news and submit your projects when we open submissions. Well, I would like to thank you, Alberto. Please tell us where we can find you on the interwebs.
You can find us at originalfiregames.com. or I'm available at Speedy Mastretta on Twitter.
Yeah, I was still up. Maybe not on the For You page, but definitely give Alberto a follow. And I would like to thank you again, Alberto, for joining us today. Thanks to Ben and Houdini for connecting us to Original Fire Games. I hope this was very interesting to developers who have joined us today. This lecture will stay up on our YouTube channel. And yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks,
Thank you
Alberto.
so much.
Yeah, see you soon.
The fun. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.